Welcome to today's presentation. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Dan. I'm the Customer Learning and Development Consultant here at RightCapital, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today for this presentation of presenting a financial plan to a pre-retiree in RightCapital. So for those of you that might be new, this is one of our RightCapital 101 webinars, which we run each and every week here at RightCapital to help you get ramped up and comfortable using the system within your practice. So on Tuesday, we created a new financial plan from scratch. Yesterday, we dove a little bit deeper into some of the planning modules within that plan. And in today's webinar, we'll be reviewing strategies and best practices for ways that you can leverage RightCapital within your client meetings and client presentations. I always like to say that we want to be that visual backdrop for your planning conversations with clients. And RightCapital really gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of really tailoring your presentation approach to suit the unique needs of your specific clients. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to talk about strategies when it comes to presenting to clients in person, over screen share maybe, using something like Zoom, and of course, you're generating PDF reports as well as static deliverables. In particular today, we're going to be looking at a case study for a pre-retiree client. So we will be reviewing a couple of big picture strategies that will be useful for you, regardless of your client demographic. But if you are someone who works with pre-retirees on a regular basis, you'll get some extra exposure today to some of the planning modules that we tend to see advisors using with those clients. Things like the investment module, the tax strategies module, maybe even a life insurance analysis. So we'll be weaving those modules into the presentation today with the ultimate goal of helping you feel better equipped to answer some of the common questions that you might be expecting those clients to ask. So, as I mentioned, just taking a quick look at our agenda here before diving in, we're going to be focusing on tips and tricks for using RightCapital as a presentation tool. We're going to touch on some of the main modules that we see advisors using in their presentations, things like the blueprint, the snapshot, and the retirement analysis. I'm also going to make sure to highlight different ways that you can mix and match some of these strategies according to your preferences. We call that fine-tuning your presentation flow. So that'll be a focus today as well. As always, near the end of the presentation, I'll be highlighting some advisor resources, some of our support resources that are available to you as RightCapital advisors. And as I'm switching my screen over to my RightCapital login here, I do want to let those of you that are new to RightCapital know that these webinars are also interactive. And if you have any questions at all as we're making our way through the presentation today, I encourage you to write in. I do have a good deal of content prepared for you today, but ultimately, I want to hear from you at the end of the day. So please feel free to write in with any questions you might have. You should find a Q&A field within the Zoom control panel on your screen, and I'll be sticking around until the top of the hour today to answer your questions. So feel free to write in. I'm here to help however I can. All right, so here we are in my case study for today. We're going to be looking at a joint plan today for Barry and Iris. And I do want to kick things off today by taking a look over the blueprint module within the profile area. This is a module that we tend to see advisors use at the top of their meetings and the top of their presentations, and that's for good reason. This module is probably the best place in RightCapital to see a summary of all of your profile inputs. So everything that you've entered into the client's current plan here in the profile, all of their assets and liabilities, all of their financial goals, all of their income, savings, and expenses. We can see all of that information laid out here, all on one screen. So this is a great place to start and just to review the client's current financial picture before diving into some of those other talking points. So just to quickly review each of the areas that we have here, starting with the net worth. This is, of course, where we see a breakdown of the client's assets and liabilities. We see everything broken out nice and clean here by owner. So everything owned by Barry on the left, everything by Iris on the right, everything jointly held in the center, and things are color-coded for you as well. So those investment accounts are green, properties and other assets are blue, loans are shown in red. So we can easily identify some of those different asset types here. Touching quickly on the goals tab, there are actually two different ways that you can view this, but starting first with the timeline view, this is where we can see all of a client's financial goals laid out throughout the course of their financial plan. And in my personal experience, this tends to be the more popular of the two visuals in terms of just walking clients through everything that they can expect down the road here, everything that they're planning to accomplish in their financial future. We can see that these clients have some vacation goals. They're planning to do some traveling in the years after they retire. We can see they have a college goal here. They're planning to put a child, or in this case, a grandchild, through college. And then we have some other items here related to things like long-term care costs, healthcare costs, a legacy goal. So we can see all those financial goals on a single page here. There is an alternate view if you want to see everything laid out in what we call the board view. And this gives you a bit more insight into the cost of each item. So the timeline is a great way to see the timing of each item, whereas the board view is a great way to quickly identify the cost. There is also a third tab here for income, savings, and expenses. And this is just going to summarize all the inputs from all three of those sections of the profile on a single screen for us. So we get a quick high-level overview of what the clients are earning. In this case, we can see our clients' salaries here. We can see that they're expecting Social Security benefits down the road. We also get a sense of what they're currently putting away in terms of savings. We can see they're both contributing 10% of their respective earnings to their respective retirement accounts, as well as their general living expenses on a monthly basis. So we can see they're spending about $6,000 a month in pre-retirement at the moment. So as you can sort of see here, this is a great place to get a high-level overview of all of the key information that you'll need to really start things off in those presentations and help clients feel comfortable with where they're at today. In terms of using this within your presentations, especially in software, I do want to quickly highlight that there are some dynamic elements to this. If you're wanting to make quick adjustments on the fly or maybe edit some of the inputs that you're seeing here, you do have the ability to do so. So just to quickly review some of those features here, if you find yourself needing to adjust something, maybe you're looking at one of these accounts, for instance, and you notice the balance isn't looking quite right, you can always click into these items to adjust the inputs. So maybe this balance is looking a little low. You can make the adjustment there, click save, and that's going to carry over, in this case, into the net worth section of the profile. So it's exactly the same as if you'd edited that item within that area of the profile. And that's going to extend across the entire client plan. It's going to update all the future projections to account for that change. So this can be a great way to sort of spot check inputs, especially if maybe you're having clients do some of their own data entry remotely. Maybe they're, making some mistakes in terms of entering some of these values. This can be a great place to spot check those inputs and correct any mistakes. You can also customize some of these visuals. In addition to being able to, drag and drop some of these items to rearrange the layout, you can also choose by clicking the edit button here, which items do you even want to see on these visuals here. So maybe there's something that, for whatever reason, we don't necessarily need to see on this screen. Maybe we want to hide Barry's Discover card, for instance. We can uncheck that box here, click save, and that item is going to be removed from the visual. So that's more of a cosmetic change that won't actually remove the item from the plan. It will still be factored into their overall net worth. It'll still be in their profile. It will just hide it from the visuals here to clean things up a little bit in those client presentations. Last but not least, you may have also noticed that there is an add button in the upper right of each of these areas. And this is a great opportunity to add new items directly to the blueprint. Maybe the client is looking over their goals here and they mention that something's missing. Maybe they are planning to move to a new estate or move into a new home in retirement, and that's something they want to see on this screen. We can click the add button in the upper right, add something like a primary home relocation goal right here to the blueprint area, and we can dial in the parameters so that that can be factored into the plan. And just like making changes to existing items, adding new items here will update the entire financial plan. All of the future-looking projections in the retirement area and everywhere else will be updated to account for that new item. So you have a lot of flexibility here with the blueprint to make changes and add new items without having to click around between the different areas of the profile here and update those individual data entry cards. Great. So after reviewing a client's current picture here in the blueprint, the place that a lot of advisors will go next in their meetings is the retirement analysis module. This is probably the most well-known module in RightCapital, and that's for good reason. The retirement analysis is one of the most powerful tools that we have at our disposal here. And it's really your playground in terms of modeling what if scenarios, playing around with specific variables, and of course, making specific recommendations as a part of a client's proposed plan. And for that reason, it's certainly become a staple for many advisors when it comes to presenting those recommendations to clients. So, starting with the action items here, these are really designed to be dynamic. So, as the conversation with your client evolves, you can quickly and easily make changes in the moment and see the impact of those changes on the client's proposed plan in real time. So, as you can imagine, that can be incredibly useful, especially if your client has some unexpected questions. And maybe if you are working with, a client in this age range, a pre-retiree client, a common question they might have is, what's the right time for us to retire? Is early retirement in the cards for us? So, for a client like this that's sitting at a relatively high probability of success, that's something we can quickly address here. Is retiring at 62, for example, going to have a significant impact on this plan, or are we still going to be sitting in a good spot here? So we can model that change, click the refresh button. It's going to crunch all the numbers for us and show us. In this case, we see a small dip, but still looking good here in terms of probability of success, even if Barry were to retire a couple of years earlier. So that's just a simple example, of course, but the retirement analysis is, essentially the sky's the limit when it comes to the retirement analysis. If you have clients that are concerned about whether or not they're saving enough and if they have to do some catching up in the years before they retire, you can model changes to their savings here very quickly and easily and see the impact of that. This is also an area where we can start to bring in some other modules as well that might be a little more specific to this case study. So that's something we can do here in the strategies column. So for those of you that might be unfamiliar with this, essentially what we see here on the right-hand side under strategies is, you have the ability to import specific strategies that you've curated in some of the dedicated planning modules in RightCapital. So for, a pre-retiree client like this, that might include something like the Social Security strategy, the optimal filing strategy. And just to take a quick look at that module, that's also located here in the retirement section. Clients that are approaching retirement might be wondering, when's the best time to file for Social Security? Should we file early to cover cash flow needs and maybe reinvest some of the excess? Should we file later to capitalize on some of those delay credits? So this is a module where we can compare and contrast different strategies and show clients the potential trade-offs there of filing at different times. This module is also going to show us, based on the specific inputs and the specific cash flow details for these clients, when they should file to maximize income from Social Security in the long term. So this will vary depending on the plan, but for these clients, it looks like delaying till age 70 is yielding the most benefit in terms of cumulative long-term income from Social Security. And that's something that we can easily turn on within the retirement analysis by simply choosing that optimal strategy here in the action items. So we can show clients, look, if you file at age 70 compared to what you're planning, age 65, we can see an increase in your probability of success and median ending assets. Asset allocation might be another common question that clients in this demographic might have. So that applies to both their asset allocation in terms of asset class, as well as potentially their tax allocation and how that's spread out between, taxable, tax deferred, and tax free. So we can take a look at all of that information in the investment module. We can start to get an idea of how our clients' investments are allocated as of today. We can see this big picture blend of all of their investments feeding in from the profile. We can take a look at how that allocation might shift over time and again, show clients very visually here, what it might look like if they were to stick with their current allocation through their pre-retirement years and then maybe switch to a different model in retirement, something like a moderate portfolio or maybe a balanced portfolio. And we can show them what that looks like here. And then, of course, tax allocation as well. We can show clients, here's the breakdown of all of your assets in terms of tax category. Here's how everything's divvied up. Maybe you have a little too much in tax deferred assets at the moment. Maybe a good candidate for something like Roth conversions, which we'll look at in just a quick second here. But we can really, again, be that visual backdrop for these planning conversations, help clients understand where they're at today and where they may want to go down the road. Back in the retirement analysis, you may have noticed you do have the ability to play around with different asset allocations. So if you wanted to implement something like that moderate portfolio in retirement into the proposed plan, that's something you can quickly and easily do here. Make sure that's factored into their proposal. The last thing I want to touch quickly on here is tax strategies. I mentioned Roth conversions a moment ago. The tax strategies module in RightCapital is where you're able to model Roth conversions for clients, as well as a couple of other tax strategies that I'll touch on quickly as well. So here in the tax strategies module, we can model three different big picture tax strategies. So starting with asset location strategy rather, this is a strategy that typically yields the most benefit for clients in higher tax brackets, but can really be helpful for anyone depending on their situation. And what we're looking at here is how the equity portion of their asset allocation is divvied up between those three tax buckets, being taxable, tax deferred, and tax free. So the general idea here is that sometimes by front loading their taxable or tax-free account buckets with as much equity as possible and saving those tax deferred accounts for our fixed income asset classes, we can be a little bit more tax efficient down the road. And we can see that this client does benefit a bit from that asset location strategy here. Of course, the withdrawal sequence is another one we can model. This is determining, when we have to dip into our investments in the plan in general. If we have years where maybe our expenses, goals, and taxes are greater than the income that's coming into the plan, what's the order of operations in terms of where we're pulling from first to fund those cash flow needs? So you can mix and match different options here, see what works best for these specific clients depending on their situation, and you can implement that within the plan. Last but not least, the Roth conversion strategy, probably the most popular option here in terms of tax strategies. There's a specific chart I like to use for this. In the calibration tab, this ordinary income tax bracket chart can be really helpful for just looking at a client's adjusted taxable income without and with conversions and sort of seeing the differences there. So in a case like this, we do see sort of a classic U shape here between retirement and RMD age where their adjusted taxable income dips a bit. So that's potentially a good opportunity to make some conversions. I have Roth conversions occurring here up to the 12% tax bracket threshold. So we can see that here in green. We can see that happening as well during these years between 65 retirement and 75 RMD age. So you can model one strategy here, or you can mix and match two or three strategies, ultimately whatever yields the best results for your clients, and we can see the big picture impact. Of course, just like our other modules here, this is something that can then be imported back into the retirement analysis. So, you can show clients here the tax strategies you've modeled, walk them through the, improvements to their big picture plan as a result of these strategies we're looking at, and then to make sure that that's being factored into their proposal back here in the retirement analysis, we can make sure that that is turned on here for that tax strategy within the action items. So I know that was a lot, just touching on all of those modules here that you might use with these clients. There are, of course, you know, limitless possibilities in terms of modules you may find yourself using here. So I do want to make sure I mention that if you are looking for more details on the modules I just touched on or anything at all on RightCapital, our help center is always a great resource. Feel free to take a look here and to search for any modules you might be curious about. And of course, you can always reach out to our support team. They're always happy to help as well. All right. So just to wrap things up here in the retirement analysis, this can be a great place to really, play around with some of those what if scenarios, answer client questions on the fly. And at the end of the day, hammer home the value of your recommendations and the positive impact of those on the client's plan as a whole. This tends to be a great area for advisors, especially that prefer more of a conversational approach to their presentations. If you're really having a conversation with clients, being able to make adjustments, depending on the nature of that conversation can be very valuable, very interactive, and keep clients engaged in that way. On the flip side, if you want to have something that's a little bit more structured, ready to go in advance, that's a great opportunity to potentially utilize the Snapshot module in RightCapital. So this is the last module we're going to look at here within the client plan. And this is another one of those very popular tools that advisors tend to use pretty often when it comes to both in-software presentations, as well as, in this case, as a standalone client deliverable. This is essentially RightCapital's version of a 1 to 2 page report. So you can, you know, be very selective here with the specific information and specific visuals that are the most relevant to these clients. And ultimately, you can pull in all of those key pieces of information and have those reflected on a single page here. So, kind of similar to the blueprint, whereas the blueprint's looking at the current plan based on the profile. The snapshot here, you may notice, is looking at the proposed plan. So, all of our changes that we've made, all of those tax strategies, our social security strategy, our asset allocation strategy, all of that's being factored into what we see here. So just to cover some of the key features here on this page, this is something that can be customized for each and every client. You can drag and drop these tiles to rearrange the layout. I find that advisors tend to use this feature to, uh, you know, pre-select the order of talking points for their meetings. If you want to walk clients through things in a very specific order, maybe touching on their balance sheet first for that overview of their current assets and liabilities, maybe then pivoting into their probability of success and taking a look at that Monte Carlo, so on and so forth. You can really fine tune this to touch on specific talking points in a specific order and work your way from top to bottom, left to right, whatever works best for you. If you find yourself needing to delete something that maybe you don't need for a client, do you know that you can always click the X icon on a specific item and remove that from the snapshot here? Of course, there are a couple dozen additional items that you may want to add depending on what you're looking to show on this area. So maybe for clients that are in that pre-retirement demographic, maybe you'd want to include something like their savings rate so that they can be confident that they're saving enough for retirement. Maybe something like their current year savings, which we can find in the retirement menu here. So we can see, what are we actually contributing this year in terms of savings? We can show some of those investment metrics that we touched on before. If we hover over investment, we'll find options for things like concentrated positions. If you have access to the risk analysis, you can include their risk summary here. And you will also find by default the client's current allocation, a blend of their equity, fixed income, and all of those asset classes, and that tax allocation breakdown as well. So those can both be included on the snapshot. I do want to mention quickly a module that I didn't touch on that I do want to make sure I mention is the insurance analysis. So there are a couple of items here that can be added to the snapshot if you are finding yourself running an insurance analysis for clients. So I do want to quickly pivot into the insurance module just to quickly cover that tool. But I do also want to showcase an additional feature here in the snapshot as well. If you're using this in software, if you're presenting to clients in person within the software or over screen share like we're doing here today, something that you can do is actually click into these tiles to open that specific module within the system. So I mentioned before, predetermining the layout of these items depending on the order of the talking points you'd like to touch on. As we're touching on each of these items, we can click the Open Item button in the upper right of that tile to launch us into that planning module in RightCapital. So we can touch on an item, launch into that module to view more details and further that conversation. And then when we're ready to move on, we can click back into the snapshot, move on to the next talking point, launch into the next item. So it can be a great sort of presentation flow if you're wanting to touch on things in a specific order and just view the details of each item as you talk about each point. So I will use that feature here to open up the insurance module and just quickly take a look at what we have there for those of you that are a bit more insurance focused in your service offerings. While the retirement module is certainly a powerful tool, the insurance module is sort of a companion piece to the retirement module. And in particular, if you are going to be doing a life insurance focused analysis for clients, this is where we can identify if there's a protection need for these clients, if they have a life insurance need, depending on, again, all of the inputs, all of the specific variables, income, expenses, financial goals that have been entered into this plan. So, it will start off identical to everything that's been entered in the profile. But of course, you can always make adjustments to these items on the fly, just like we did back in the retirement analysis module. So maybe in this case, maybe these clients don't have a protection need in this case, in terms of, making it to the end of their plan without running out of money. But maybe they do want to make sure that they have, a certain amount of assets to leave behind for their children or their heirs. We can add something like a legacy goal to this area. And then if we click refresh here, we might see a different story in terms of, a protection need for these individuals. So hopefully once this refreshes, we can generate a protection need here. Looks like this plan is doing pretty well, so we don't see one at the moment, but you get the idea. We can make adjustments to the expenses, goals, and so on, and we can see if there's a protection need for these clients. If you need to, there are additional tabs here where we can zero in on what's happening within each of these scenarios and really see, is there an income shortage happening? At what point is that occurring within the plan? And you can always dive into the cash flow details as well to really see, what are the mechanics of, what's happening behind the scenes? How are we determining whether or not there's a protection need being calculated? Are the clients running out of assets at any point in either of these simulations? So we can see in this case, we still have 2.7 million at the end of these projections, no protection need for these clients. Just to wrap things up here, I mentioned this is something that could be included as a piece of information back in the dashboard snapshot module. You can include that protection need visual for both the client as well as for the co-client here within this tool. All right. So before moving on, I do want to make sure to touch on the fact that because this is such a dynamic tool, because you can rearrange the layout of this and really customize this for specific clients, it can be helpful to have templates saved in advance for this. So if you find yourself rearranging things into the same layout or generally the same order for the majority of your clients, that might be a good opportunity to leverage Snapshot templates in RightCapital. And for this, I am going to quickly pivot back into the advisor area here where we can find the templates area. So we're going to revisit this one or two more times today, but first, just by taking a look at the snapshot templates, now you can create snapshot layouts in advance and quickly and easily apply those to client plans before those presentations to make sure that everything is ready to go before those clients arrive. So I do have a couple examples of just some general things I've seen advisors do that I think are clever. Some advisors will use the text boxes in the snapshot to leave, messages for clients. I have an example here where I've left a welcome message for new clients with some contact info. You can leave hyperlinks here if you want clients to be able to book time on your calendar. So that can be really valuable. I also see advisors use the notes boxes as a way to write out more specific written recommendations along with some of those visuals and key pieces of information. So you can pair specific metrics with specific recommendations or talking points from those meetings so that clients can really see, the specific talking points that you touched on for each of those items, along with some of those visuals as well. So this is just another way that you can utilize these within your plans. Of course, there's something we also see advisors do is create templates that are a little bit more focused on their clients, the demographics that they tend to work with most frequently. So if you wanted to put together a layout for those pre-retiree clients, you can create a new template, name it something like pre-retiree, and it's exactly the same as customizing the snapshot for a single client, rearrange the layout, add those new items, and you can then apply those templates at the bottom here to one or more clients to make sure that those are in place and ready to go before those presentations. So today we're looking at Barry Allen. We can choose Barry Allen here, click save, and apply that snapshot layout to that client. All right. So the next thing I want to touch on here is something called client access mode. I'm going to take a quick sip of water here, folks, and then we can dive into client access. All right. So we spent most of our time so far today touching on planning modules within the Right Capital client plan. However, there is something you can do here in the client list in your advisor area to maybe streamline things even further ahead of those client presentations. So, I touched on maybe using the snapshot as a way to ping back and forth between that one-page report and some of those specific planning modules. If you'd rather cut down on some of the unnecessary planning modules, maybe for a case like this, maybe we know we're not going to be touching on the education module, for instance. Maybe we're not at the point yet where we're doing any estate planning. And maybe we don't need those modules present here within the plan during that presentation. That's a great opportunity to use something called client access mode. So for this, you'll want to start by choosing the client you're going to present to in your client list, and then you'll want to click into the planning access menu on the right side here. This area provides you with a checklist of all of the planning modules within that plan. And we can be a little bit selective here in terms of what we actually want to see within the presentation. So really the primary function of this tool is, if you're inviting clients to have remote access to their plan, if you're sending them an email invitation so that they can log in remotely and view that plan, the planning access template here, or the planning access menu rather, is where you can choose, okay, which modules do I want that client to be able to access? Maybe I only want them to see the snapshot, balance sheet, and asset allocation, for instance. You can check those three boxes, and that's all they'll see when they log in. However, something that advisors also use this for is a way to create a presentation view for those clients as well. So even if you're not inviting clients, this is something that you can use to streamline your viewpoint for those meetings. So maybe we want to start, like I mentioned before, with the blueprint module. Maybe we want that to be the first thing we see at the top of the plan for that overview of their current financial picture. We can check that box, drag it to the top here. Maybe we then want to dive into the retirement analysis module. Maybe we want to then touch on some of those recommendations we're making and touch on some of those common questions. We can do that next. And then maybe we also want to include some of those more specific modules we looked at today, things like the asset allocation, allocation path, and tax allocation, maybe our life insurance analysis, maybe our tax strategies, before wrapping things up with the snapshot module, that high level overview of the plan as a whole. So, of course, that's a quick example here of what you're able to do with this. But at the end of the day, once you have all of your modules selected here and rearranged in the order you want to see, we click save in the lower right. Instead of opening the plan normally from the advisor perspective by clicking one of these buttons here, we're instead going to click the downward facing arrow next to open client. And that's going to reveal an option to open this plan in client access mode. So this is essentially a way for us to impersonate the client perspective. So by doing this, we have access to these modules based on those specific selections that we just made in that checklist. So we can see first and foremost here, we're starting off with this profile blueprint area for viewing that client's current financial picture. We then have the retirement analysis module with all of our changes that we've made, current versus proposed plan, to really dive in and address some of those questions and recommendations. I do always like to mention, even when presenting in client access mode, you do still have full action item functionality. I know that's a common question that advisors tend to ask. Even in this presentation view, you can still add new items to your action item display, make adjustments to anything you might need to change. So you have full functionality here, even in this perspective. And then we have the rest of those modules I selected: the investment modules, our insurance analysis here, the tax strategies tool to dive a little deeper into those tax strategies we've modeled, before wrapping things up with the snapshot for that high level overview, that high level recap of everything. So Like I said, this is a very popular option when it comes to presenting, especially for those of you that might be a little bit newer and maybe haven't quite memorized yet where all of these planning modules are located within each of these tabs. I know it does take a little bit of time, using the system to really get familiar and to get 100% comfortable remembering, where each and every module is located at the top here. So client access mode can be a really helpful way to cut down on the extra that maybe isn't needed and really, streamline things in a very specific order. All right. So I'm going to pivot back out here to the retirement or to the advisor area for a moment. I want to also touch on the fact that when it comes to planning access, you also have the ability to create templates for these. So again, just like Snapshot, if you find yourself making the same selections here, rearranging things into the same order, checking the same boxes for multiple clients, and you want to save yourself some time, you can do so within the templates planning access area. You can create, templates by doing the exact same thing we just looked at, checking specific boxes, dragging and dropping these into a specific order. And you can create these for specific client demographics or however best suits your workflow when it comes to setting up these templates. So this is another great opportunity to just save you a little bit of time there when it comes to planning access. All right. So we are getting close to the end of the presentation here, folks. I do want to make sure to leave time for the Q&A, but before we do that, I do want to make sure to touch on reports. Of course, we've looked at a couple ways now that you can present to clients in software within RightCapital. And while this is certainly becoming an increasingly popular way to present these days, being able to generate those reports and really, fine tune those physical, paper reports, those PDF files is an important piece of the puzzle here. So we're going to wrap things up today by covering how to generate those reports, how to customize those, and also how to create templates for those to save you some time as well. So let's dive back into our plan here for Barry. We can generate those reports at any time by clicking the gear icon in the upper right and then clicking into the report subtab here. And this might look familiar to you. The report checklist here is pretty much identical to what we just walked through with planning access. And the idea here is exactly the same. We get to pick and choose which modules we want to see in our report. We can determine the order that we want those to be reflected by dragging and dropping these specific tabs or specific modules into our desired order. And at the end of the day, we can click download selected pages in the lower right to download that as a PDF file to our computer. So let's go ahead and dial things into a more intentional order here, just so we get a more realistic example. Maybe we do want to start with that blueprint. Maybe we want to then pivot into the retirement analysis. I want to make sure to mention, if you ever see an item here that's underlined, that indicates that you can actually click into these items to be even more specific with what sections you'd like to include. So some of those areas, like the retirement analysis, like the cash flows that have a lot of tables and a lot of charts and visuals, maybe you don't necessarily need every single chart and every single visual. So you can be a little more selective here and just choose the information that's the most relevant for those clients. So we can choose which modules we'd like to see. Maybe we want to end up with the dashboard snapshot as our area to wrap things up here. With all of that dialed in, we can click download selected pages. I'll give this just a second to download, and then I'll actually open this up so we can see what some of these modules look like within PDF form. So once this downloads here, I can open this up. We, of course, have our cover page, which is included in every report. But if we skip a couple pages, we can see our blueprint module. We get that same visual we saw in the system, that one page view of all of the client's assets and liabilities, all of their financial goals. I did have it set to the board view. You may remember there's two different layouts here. Whichever one you have selected in the plan when you generate that report is the one that will be included in the report. So if you prefer to see that timeline, you do know that you can switch over to that timeline view here in the blueprint module, and that will be reflected in the report instead. So just something to keep in mind there. We have our income, savings, and expenses. We can see all that summarized on one page. I do want to show what the Monte Carlo and what the retirement analysis looks like here as well. Of course, in PDF form, we don't have the more interactive elements like we do in system, but we still get to see a summary of our proposed versus current, that Monte Carlo analysis over time, and we can even see our action items here. So even without that dynamic element, we still can easily identify, what changes have been made to this proposal that are resulting in that improvement to the proposed plan's probability of success. So we see all the changes we made here today: increase in savings, change in asset allocation, change in Social Security filing strategy, and so on. And those are highlighted blue for you to make them a little bit easier to see on this page. I do also want to just quickly show what the snapshot looks like. Most of the time, that does get limited to a single page, but I did include some additional, tiles in the snapshot. So do keep in mind, if you're adding quite a lot of tiles to the snapshot, there's a chance it can bleed onto a second page. So, I know a lot of advisors do like to keep this to one page at most. So if you really want to make sure that this doesn't bleed onto a second page, maybe just be a little bit intentional with the way that you, arrange these tiles here. You can sort of save yourself some space by making sure to make full use of the space from left to right in addition from top to bottom. So something to keep in mind there when rearranging the layout for these snapshot reports. So that's a quick overview of reports. Of course, these all include our 9-point disclosure as well. So I want to quickly mention that this is included. And before transitioning into the Q&A here, I want to touch one more time on templates. When it comes to generating reports, just like planning access, it can be a huge time saver for you, especially if you know what modules you like to include for the majority of your clients to create a template for that in advance. So, maybe we want to create a template for those pre-retiree clients and be selective with which modules we want and the order that those are reflected. We can walk through this, make those changes, and then we can apply those within the plan. So something to keep in mind with report templates, you won't find an apply template button at the bottom here, like those other templates we looked at. The reason for that is your templates in RightCapital are generated within the client plan itself. So when you're downloading those reports, you will find that template option at the top here to very quickly and easily select the template you want. All those selections will pre-fill for you, and you can go ahead and just download that. So that will definitely save you some time going forward. All right. So that being said, that does cover it for the prepared content I had for you today. I do want to make sure to save time here for the Q&A. So I am going to, open up those questions on my other screen here. As I'm getting these pulled up, I do want to make sure to mention for those of you that are new to Right Capital, we are always here to help. So if you're getting ready to make maybe your first presentation to a client in Right Capital, and maybe you're feeling like you'd like someone to look over the plan for you, make sure that everything's looking accurate, or even give you some tips in terms of strategies that you can use to present to that client based on the specifics for their plan, our support team's a great resource for that sort of thing. So I do want to make sure to touch on our help center and our support team resources. You can always access the help center either in the advisor area by clicking into the help tab here, or at any time, even within the client plan, by clicking the chat bubble in the lower right and then clicking search our help center. Either of those options is going to take you right here to the help center homepage. In general, you can sort of think of this as Google for Right Capital. Anything you might be curious about, you can search for here and you'll find, training videos, quick tutorial videos, long form written overviews of all of our modules, really diving deep into all the features. So this is a great starting point. If you do have any questions about anything we touched on here today, feel free to search for those modules here in the Help Center and you'll find lots of resources to take a look at. Of course, our support team's always available to help as well. And when it comes to preparing for presentations, in particular, there is one option that I like to recommend. When it comes to our support team, you can always reach out to them using the chat feature, or you can give them a call on the phone if you want to talk to someone, in person essentially. But when it comes to preparing for those presentations, the option that I like to recommend is this second option here: schedule a case review. This is a way for you to schedule either a 15 or 30-minute session with a product expert in advance, whatever works best for your schedule. And you can actually leave a note when you book that appointment to let the support specialists know, what plan you'd like them to take a look at and what questions you have so that they can take a look at that in advance and really prepare for that call with you. And then ultimately, you can spend that 30-minute session either on the phone or even over Zoom if you want to screen share with them, really diving deep into that plan, answering any questions you might have, double checking to make sure that everything's looking accurate. So these are a great resource, especially if you are preparing for your first Right Capital presentation. So I always like to mention there is no cost associated, no limits in terms of how frequently you can utilize any of our support resources. So truly, we are here to help. Feel free to lean on our support team as much as you need as you're learning how to use Right Capital.